Emily, we met this morning and I observed in your classroom during your Introduction to Accountable talk. So now we're going to work through creating a student-centered goal around students reaching that in the classroom. So what would you say that the focus is of what you want to accomplish?
I want students to, students will be able to use some of the growth mindset language that we've already been talking about, but specifically with developing constructive feedback. And so as an introduction to that, I introduced Accountable Talk and had them practice how to agree and disagree respectfully.
All right. Students will use the growth mindset language that you guys have been studying, and then use that to provide constructive feedback to their peers using Accountable Talk to agree or disagree respectfully. Okay, great. So let me pull up your priority standards that we've identified and look at where we might find a standards tie there. So we've got learning standards, learning strategies right here, it looks like. The gather evidence.
I can think of other students' point of view when making decisions.
Okay, great. And then let's see. I know in your lesson you talked a lot about creating positive friendships with that as well. I know that that was part of your focus of your lesson.
Eventually I want it to be in settings where it's more of like social settings. Right now we're focused on just using the sentence stems, and so eventually I want it to be in a social setting or in a friendship setting where they would use this.
So being able to apply it in other areas outside of just the classroom, whether it's conflict or just in their everyday life.
Maintaining a friendship.
So we can put both of those on there.
Okay.
And so I can think of other students' point of view when making decisions, and I can work through friendship problems in a respectful way. And both of those are part of your ASCA standards. And so when you think about the goal after you working through this for one or two times more that you're going to be meeting with your students, what sorts of things will you be looking for? What will the student behavior look like once they've accomplished or met this goal?
I guess I'll know that students have met the goal when they first can attend to what the other person is saying. So using those group skills that we've talked about, and listening skills, but then also when they're using that language. So instead of you're wrong or that's not right, turning it into I disagree, but then also having a reason or something to support why they feel differently.
Okay.
And then eventually I used to teach, or I do teach iMessages, and so I want that to be the next step. So they start off with just learning how to do this with pretty easy easy statements, and then turn it into those times where they're in a conflict.
Okay. So it sounds like you've done work with iMessages before.
Yes.
And they've learned how to speak with each other when they're having conflict, but what I understand is you need something before that.
Yes.
So it's not automatically being thrown into how do you talk to someone during a conflict? Let's do it out of conflict first.
Right. Yeah, it takes the emotion out of it, so they're doing it without there being a conflict that's already arisen.
Okay.
Because and then it also, I've noticed is that they can do it in the classroom in like a controlled setting, but then they have a hard time applying it in those actual environments that they're having conflict or when they're struggling. So trying to give them more practice and then just getting them to kind of change their whole mindset about how to do that.
Awesome. So when I look at some of the things that I wrote down for when I went in for the observation to do data collection on just the introduction of this, so most of the things that I heard after your introductions to it were very positive. So I agree, everyone should play with, one of the things was only boys should play with superheroes, which I thought was a great one that this group started with, because there was 2 boys and 2 girls, and the 2 boys were very passionate, like, oh, that's just a boy thing, and the girls were kind of like, well, no way, everyone can play with superheroes. It's not just a boy thing. So it kind of changed the thinking of the boys, where they were like, yeah, I think I could agree with that. And then I agree, because anyone can play with superheroes. Or there was a question about basketball. That basketball is the best sport. So I disagree. Sometimes people like other sports. And then there was another that said, I think the same thing as you did. There weren't a lot that I saw that pattern, like, off of each other.
Yeah.
Most of them were just saying, I disagree because, and I agree because, those were the great sentence stems to be used. Some of them the responses definitely used your cue of the sentence. The only few that I questioned, maybe having those students, just checking in with those students, were a couple of them that were cutting people off, so interrupted and didn't allow that student to finish, and it happened a couple of times. So I don't know if that student just isn't strong enough to say, hey, you interrupted me, which I totally understand. That's age appropriate, but then also respecting to make sure everybody has their voice. And I know you said that up front, so maybe thinking about ways to revisit that before the next time that's taught. And then there was only one other one, and it was right at the beginning when they first sat down, as one of the girls said, you should disagree with that because that's not right. And then another group member stepped in and they said, well, I disagree with what you just said. So they're using that already.
Awesome.
But I think with just a little bit more practice, it'll be able to apply outside of school settings. Talk with me through how you envision the next time that you visit with these second graders about this topic.
It's going to be set up in a similar way. So we'll start off. We didn't have a lot of time to reflect on today's lesson. And so I want to give them time to talk about their experience with that activity, and then some of the things that you saw and I saw, and give them specific examples. And then
and maybe even non-examples too.
And even non-examples, yeah. And I feel like maybe more time for me to model what that would look like, because I feel like a lot of the time was spent just trying to figure out who was going to speak first. And so then taking that time to, I'll have things in place to help them with that, so we can get right into the work. So I feel like a lot of it was just the organizational piece of like what was happening today. So I think if I can eliminate some of those housekeeping things, then we can get more into like those conversations. So I want to talk to them about things that I noticed that they were saying, and then extending it to the group. Like you said, there was some group members that took what somebody else said and agreed with that, and that's some of those other accountable talk sentences. I want to introduce a few more of them for next time.
Okay. All right. So, thinking about how students might gauge proficiency of, how do you know when you want to move on to the next one? What do you have in mind of how to gauge or look at some sort of data, which we can do together, on how you'll know which students are ready for the next steps or which students might need a little bit more support?
Today I just did a quick little, give me a thumbs up if you're clear on everything. But I think having something more concrete, like an exit slip or something like that, that tells me, where they're at in that learning, I think would be a good idea to know what my next step is.
And knowing the small time frame that you have, having it be something quick like that would be good.
Yeah.
To be able to say, these kids have it, these kids don't, and then kind of looking, okay, what didn't they get? That would be good for us. We could easily do that after the lesson.
Okay.
When we do our debrief together. So when you think about what you'd like me to do when we come together again next week for your next lesson with these second graders, what do you think that you have that you want me to do?
I think, doing the observation, but then maybe even co-teaching with me, where you take some kids just so that we can focus more on, you know, getting them to think a little differently, or elaborating, or, you know, figuring out different ways that they can say
Sure.
that they agree or disagree
Okay.
with that. So.
Absolutely. Well, and I think about what you said with modeling too. There wasn't a lot of time to model, so
Yes.
if we split the kids up in half, it might be easier for us to model, hey, I'm with this group, these two groups, and then going back and forth, and then I'll be with these two groups going back and forth. There'll be more of an opportunity to model appropriate ways, and then catch some of those instances where someone might be cut off. Let's remind her that this is about kids using their voices. So
Yeah, somebody to like help remember the norms of being in a group.
awesome. Okay, great. So, do you want to look at creating an exit slip right now? Do you want to work on that now, and then
Yes.
that way that'll be ready to go?
Yep.
Okay, awesome.